Who gave this to you, Sarah? Tell me his name before I burn this entire room to the ground just to find him." Song Kang's voice was a jagged blade cutting through the music of the Gala. For 3 years, I was his shadow, the invisible advisor who kept his empire running and his heart on ice. I followed every rule, kept every secret, and never once let him see me bleed. But tonight, the ice finally shattered. Seoul's most lethal predator wasn't looking at the guest list or the rival families. He was looking at my finger. His tattooed hands were trembling, his breath hitched in his throat, and for the first time in 3 years, the cold king was completely unraveled, all because of a diamond he thought belonged to another man. Welcome back to our empire of obsession, dark romance lovers. Today, we're witnessing the ultimate downfall, a ruthless mafia boss who realizes the woman he treated as just an assistant is actually the only person he can't live without. We're talking he falls first, high-stakes jealousy, and a queen who knows exactly how to make him crawl. If you're addicted to protective dons, elegant heroines, and the kind of tension that makes your heart race, you're home. Hit that subscribe button and join our inner circle, because tonight we're watching a king trade his crown for a single glance from his lady. Before we dive into the rain-soaked confession that changed everything, tell me in the comments, does a jealous Song Kang melt your heart, or do you prefer him cold and calculating? Smash that like button, and let's see how a diamond brought a giant to his knees. The golden glow of the Gala blurred into a memory, replaced by the stark, sterile perfection of Song Kang's private office 3 years ago. Back then, he wasn't a man who trembled at the sight of a ring. He was a statue carved from obsidian, air-conditioned and heartless. I remember the day I walked in for my final interview. The air in the room felt thin, heavy with the scent of expensive sandalwood, and the unspoken threat of a man who didn't just lead a syndicate, he owned the very ground it stood upon. Song Kang sat behind a desk of dark mahogany, his white shirt crisp, the top button done up to his throat, hiding the ink that I would later learn traced the geography of his violent rise to power. He didn't look up when I entered. He let the silence stretch, a common tactic to see who would crack first. But I had spent my life mastering the art of the stillness. I stood there, my spine a straight line of obsidian grace, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I didn't fidget, I didn't breathe too loudly. I simply existed in his space until the silence became my weapon instead of his. When he finally looked up, his eyes were like winter in Seoul, beautiful, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You've worked for the Ministry of Justice and 2 Fortune 500 CEOs, he'd said, his voice a low, melodic rasp. "Why come to a man who handles problems the law can't touch?" "Because," I replied, my voice as smooth as the champagne I'd later sip at his side, "the law is limited by what is right. You are only limited by what is possible. I prefer the latter." A flicker of something, interest, hunger, crossed his face for a fraction of a second before the mask slid back into place. From that moment on, I became his shadow. I learned the rhythm of his moods by the way he adjusted his cufflinks. I knew when a hit was ordered by the slight tightening of his jaw, and I knew when he was satisfied by the way he'd let his head lean back against his leather chair for exactly 3 seconds. For 3 years, we danced a silent tango. I was the one who translated his silences into orders. I was the one who could walk into a room of trembling lieutenants and deliver a death sentence with the grace of a prayer. I made myself indispensable. I made myself a ghost. I convinced myself that the way his gaze would linger on the nape of my neck when I turned to leave was just my imagination. I told myself that the reason he never let another advisor stay in the room when we spoke was purely for security. But there were moments when the cold king slipped, like the night in Busan,
after a particularly bloody negotiation with the Japanese clans. He had been grazed by a bullet, his black suit jacket ruined. I was the one who cleaned the wound in the back of the armored SUV because he wouldn't let the medics touch him. The car was dark, lit only by the passing streetlights that threw amber slashes across his face. As I pressed the gauze to his shoulder, his hand suddenly shot out, catching my wrist. His grip wasn't violent, it was desperate. He didn't say a word, but he pulled me closer until I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, a stark contrast to the icy demeanor he wore during the day. His thumb brushed against my pulse point, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of my heart which had betrayed my calm exterior. For a heartbeat, the advisor and the boss disappeared. It was just a man and a woman in the dark, tethered by a tension so thick it felt like gravity. Then he let go. "Finish it, Sarah," he'd whispered, his eyes dark with a longing he refused to name. That was the foundation of our 3 years of silence, a mountain of unspoken words, of stolen glances, and a growing obsession that he buried under mountains of paperwork and blood. I thought I had mastered him. I thought I had won the game by staying neutral. But as the Gala lights returned to focus and I felt his gaze burning into the diamond on my finger, I realized I hadn't been his shadow at all. I had been the sun he was orbiting, and he was finally tired of being in the cold. The morning after the gala, the atmosphere in the penthouse office didn't just feel cold, it felt brittle, like glass pushed to its breaking point. I arrived at my usual time, 7 a.m. sharp, dressed in a charcoal silk blouse that felt like armor. I set his espresso on the dark mahogany desk, the porcelain clinking softly. I made sure to use my left hand. I made sure. The diamond caught the morning sun, sending a fracture of light dancing across the files he was pretending to read. Kang didn't look up. He was committed to the lie of indifference, his jaw set in a line so rigid it looked painful. "The Chen delegation is requesting a meeting at noon," I said, my voice as professional and light as a summer breeze. "I've cleared your schedule, but you'll need to sign the directive for the Busan port expansion first." He grunted a response, a sound that was more growl than word. He reached for his fountain pen, but as he did, his eyes betrayed him. They didn't go to the signature line. They slid, magnetic and helpless, to my finger. I saw the way his pupils blown wide, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the pen. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making, desperately trying to pretend he could still breathe. The day proceeded in a state of agonizing silent warfare. Every time I entered the room to bring him a report or a fresh cup of coffee, I felt his gaze like a physical touch. He tried to play the role of the distant boss, giving short, clipped instructions, but the mask was slipping. When I stood beside him to point out a discrepancy in the ledger, he leaned away as if my proximity burned him, yet his eyes stayed locked on that shimmering stone. "Is there something wrong with the numbers, Mr. Song?" I asked, tilting my hand just enough so the rings sparkled. He finally looked at me, his eyes dark with a storm of unspoken questions and raw, bleeding jealousy. "The numbers are fine, Sarah," he rasped, his voice sounding like it had been dragged over gravel. "It's the distractions I find unacceptable." "Distractions?" I echoed, feigning innocence as I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, ensuring my hand stayed in his line of sight. He stood up so abruptly his chair hit the wall with a dull thud. He paced to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Seoul skyline, his back to me. His shoulders were tense, the fabric of his bespoke suit straining against his frame. "You've changed," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're loud today. Your presence is loud." "I haven't said more than 20 words since I arrived," I countered, softly, stepping closer. I could see his reflection in the glass, the way his chest heaved, the way he squeezed his eyes shut for a second, as if trying to erase the image of me belonging to someone else. "It's not your voice," he snapped, turning around. He was inches away now, the scent of his sandalwood cologne mixing with the sharp tang of his frustration. He looked down at my hand, his breath hitching. He wanted to grab my wrist. He wanted to demand to know who had dared to claim what he had spent 3 years silently coveting. But he was Song Kang. He was the man of ice. So instead, he simply shoved his hands into his pockets, his gaze burning with a fire that promised to consume us both. "Get out," he whispered, the command lacking any real bite. It wasn't an order from a boss. It was a plea from a man who was losing his mind. I smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, and turned to leave. I knew that even after the door closed, he wouldn't be looking at his reports. He would be staring at the empty space where my hand had been, haunted by a ghost of a commitment that didn't even exist. The cold shoulder was failing, and the heat was just beginning to rise. By the second day, the quiet tension in the office had transformed into a frantic, low-frequency hum of terror, not for me, but for every man in Song Kang's employ. From my desk, I watched through the glass partition as the syndicate's most seasoned trackers scrambled, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Song Kang hadn't left his office since dawn. He was a predator in a cage of his own making, and the city was about to feel the heat of his fever. "I want a name," I heard his voice roar, muffled by the heavy doors but still vibrating through the floorboards. "I want the jeweler, the credit card statement, and the address of the man who dared to place that stone on her hand." I sat perfectly still, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I finalized a shipping manifesto. I knew exactly what was happening. Song Kang had weaponized his entire intelligence network for a ghost hunt. He had suspended 3 high-level drug negotiations and put a hold on a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition in Gangnam, all to find a fiancé who didn't exist. To him, that diamond wasn't just jewelry, it was a declaration of war. Min-ho, Song Kang's head of security, and a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts without breaking a sweat, practically stumbled out of the inner office. He paused at my desk, wiping a bead of perspiration from his brow. He looked at me, then his eyes darted to the ring on my finger, and he winced as if the light reflecting off it physically hurt him. "Sarah," he hissed, leaning in close, "for the love of everything holy, who is he? Boss has us shaking down every high-end boutique from Myeongdong to Paris. He's convinced it's a rival. He's already got a hit list of every bachelor in the city with a net worth over 10 billion won. He's going to turn Seoul into a graveyard by midnight if we don't give him a name." I looked up at Min-ho, my expression a mask of professional concern. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, Min-ho. Mr. Song hasn't mentioned any personal matters to me. Is the coffee not to his liking?" Before Min-ho could respond, the intercom buzzed with a sharp, aggressive static. "Sarah, in here, now." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my dress, and walked into the lion's den. The office was a wreck. Maps of the city were sprawled across the table, and digital displays showed grainy surveillance footage of the gala. Song Kang was standing by the window, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, intricate ink climbing his forearms. He looked feral. "You've been with me for 3 years. I know your schedule, I know your bank accounts, I know the names of your primary school teachers, and yet I don't know who he is."
"There is no he, Mr. Song," I said softly, standing just behind him. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. It was a raw, bleeding mixture of agony and possessiveness. He stepped into my space, his shadow engulfing me. "Don't lie to me, not you. I can handle the betrayals of my enemies, but I will not take a lie from your lips." He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my face, trembling with the effort not to touch me. "Who bought it? Was it the Italian delegate, the Kim heir? Tell me, so I can show them why you were never theirs to take." The air between us was electric, thick with the scent of his expensive tobacco and the sweet, heavy fragrance of the roses on his desk. He was a man prepared to burn the world down just to keep me in the ashes. "The hunt is a waste of your resources," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's not a waste," he rasped, his eyes dropping to the ring again, his jaw clenching so hard I heard the bone click. "It's a reclamation." He turned back to his monitors, his obsession fueling a fire that was quickly spiraling out of control. He didn't realize that the only person he was truly hunting was the man he saw in the mirror every morning. The restaurant was one of those exclusive, glass-walled sanctuaries perched high above the neon veins of Seoul, a place where the elite came to whisper secrets over vintage wine. Kang had called it a necessary briefing with a potential investor, but as I sat across from him in the dimly lit corner booth, the third chair remained conspicuously empty. There was no investor. There was only the scent of white truffles, the soft hum of a cello, and the man who looked like he was vibrating with a silent, elegant rage. The golden light of the chandelier played across Song Kang's sharp cheekbones, but his eyes were fixed on my left hand as I lifted my crystal glass. The diamonds sparkled, mocking him. He hadn't touched his steak. Instead, he watched the way the light refracted off the stone. His fingers drummed a slow, rhythmic tattoo against the white tablecloth, a sound that reminded me of a ticking clock before an explosion. "The vintage is excellent, Mr. Song," I said, my voice like silk. I let the wine linger on my tongue, watching him over the rim of the glass with a small, knowing smile. "It's a pity our guest couldn't make it. Should we discuss the port expansion instead?" "Forget the port," he rasped, his voice dropping an octave, becoming that dangerous gravelly sound that usually meant someone was about to lose their life. Tonight, it just meant he was losing his mind. "Let's discuss your taste in men, Sarah. I wasn't aware you preferred the kind who buy their way into a woman's heart with shiny trinkets."
I let out a soft, melodic laugh that I knew grated on his nerves. "Is that what you think this is? A trinket?" I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, moving the ring directly into the center of his vision. "It's quite heavy, actually, but the weight is comforting, like a promise." I saw his jaw tighten so hard the muscle jumped. He leaned in, his shadow stretching across the table until he was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. "A promise from whom? I've run the names of every man you've spoken to in the last 6 months. None of them are worthy of holding your coat, let alone your hand." "Maybe you missed someone," I countered, my heart racing at the sheer intensity of his gaze. "You've always said that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who stay in the shadows, haven't you?" He reached across the table, his hand snapping out to catch my wrist. His skin was burning, his grip firm but careful, as if he were afraid that if he squeezed too hard, he'd break the only thing keeping him tethered to his humanity. He didn't pull me closer, he just held me there, his thumb grazing the skin just below the ring. The contact was electric, a sweet, terrifying heat that traveled straight to my core. "Tell me his name," he whispered, his eyes searching mine with a raw, desperate vulnerability that he couldn't hide anymore. "Tell me and I'll give you 10 times what he offered. I'll give you the city. I'll give you the world. Just take it off." "You're overstepping, Mr. Song," I said, though I didn't pull away. I enjoyed the way his composure was crumbling, the way the cold boss was being reduced to a man begging for an answer. This ring wasn't an offer. It was a choice. He let go of my wrist as if the contact had shocked him, his hand retreating to clench into a fist on the table. He stood up, the chair screeching against the floor, drawing the eyes of the other diners. He didn't care. He looked down at me, his face a mask of possessive agony. "Dinner is over," he said, his voice trembling with a dark, lovely heat. "We're going home. And tomorrow, Sarah, you're going to tell me exactly who I have to kill to make you mine again." I stood up slowly, smoothing my champagne satin dress, my smile never wavering. He thought he was the one in control, but as he turned to lead the way out, I saw the way his hand went to his chest, right over his heart. The interrogation was over, but the war for his soul had just begun. The fragrance arrived before the messenger did, a scent so thick and sweet it felt like a physical intrusion into the sterile, cold air of the office. It was a bouquet of black baccara roses, so deep a red they bordered on ebony, wrapped in minimalist white silk. I didn't need to read the card to know they were from Mark, a celebratory just because, from the one man who had always supported my independence. I placed them on the corner of my desk, the velvet petals a stark contrast to the glass and steel surrounding me. I felt the shift in the room before I heard the door open. The temperature didn't just drop, the very molecules of the air seemed to crystallize. Kang was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon sun. He wasn't moving. He was staring at the roses with a look of such concentrated, quiet loathing that I half expected the flowers to wither under his gaze. Who sent them? The question wasn't barked, it was bled out, a low, tortured sound that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "A friend," I replied, my voice steady as I adjusted a stray stem. I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on the deep crimson petals, enjoying the way the diamond on my finger caught the light as I moved. He heard I was having a particularly eventful week. The sound of his footsteps was slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in for the kill. He stopped at the edge of my desk, his shadow falling over me, blotting out the sun. He reached out, his hand hovering over the bouquet. For a second, I thought he was going to throw them across the room. Instead, his fingers brushed against the card tucked into the silk. He didn't open it. He just gripped it until the expensive cardstock crumpled in his fist. "I've spent 3 years giving you everything you could ever ask for," he whispered, his voice trembling with a dark, lovely heat. "Security, power, a seat at the table of the most powerful man in this country. And yet you accept these from a man who thinks a handful of dying plants is enough to claim your attention?" "It's the thought that counts, Mr. Song," I said, finally looking up at him. His face was a mask of possessive agony, his eyes dark enough to drown in. He knows what I like. He knows I value things that are chosen, not just things that are bought. That was the breaking point. The cold king didn't just shatter, he exploded in a way that was terrifying and beautiful all at once. He slammed his hands down on my desk, leaning over me until our faces were inches apart. I could feel the frantic heat of his breath, smell the sharp tang of his desperation. "You are not his," he roared, the sound echoing through the glass walls of the office, likely sending his guards into a panic in the hallway. "You are mine, Sarah. You have been mine since the second you walked through that door 3 years ago. I don't care about the ring. I don't care about the roses. I will tear this city apart brick by brick before I let another man touch so much as a strand of your hair." He grabbed the bouquet, his knuckles white, and threw it into the trash bin with a violent finality. Then he grabbed my hand, the one wearing the ring, and pulled it to his chest, right over his heart. It was beating so fast it felt like a trapped bird. "Tell me," he rasped, his eyes searching mine with a raw, bleeding vulnerability. "Tell me he's nothing. Tell me you bought that ring yourself. Tell me anything, Sarah, because if you don't, I'm going to lose the only part of myself that isn't a monster." The silence that followed was heavy, sweet, and absolutely electric. I looked at him, at the man who had finally been brought to his knees by his own obsession, and for the first time I didn't smile. I let him see the reflection of his own fire in my eyes. The ice was gone. There was only the heat. The sky over Seoul had finally surrendered, drenching the city in a cold, relentless downpour that blurred the neon lights into streaks of weeping color. I walked toward the edge of the corporate parking structure, my heels clicking sharply against the wet concrete, the champagne satin of my gown now a heavy, damp weight against my skin. I needed the air. I needed the distance, but the roar of an engine cutting through the rain told me that distance was a luxury I no longer possessed. A black sedan screeched to a halt just yards away, the door flinging open before the car had even fully settled. Kang stepped out into the deluge. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't have his usual composure. His white shirt was translucent from the rain, clinging to the hard lines of his chest and revealing the dark, swirling ink of the tattoos beneath. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and found it too cold. "Where are you going, Sarah?" His voice was a low thrum, competing with the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof. "Home, Kang," I replied, turning to face him. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I kept my chin high, my silhouette a defiant line against the gray sky. "The office is closed. My shift is over." "Your shift is never over." He closed the gap between us in 3 predatory strides, his boots splashing through the puddles. He didn't stop until he was looming over me, his heat radiating through the damp chill of the evening. He smelled of rain and that desperate dark sandalwood. He reached out, his hands trembling as they gripped my shoulders, pinning me against a concrete pillar. "You're running to him, aren't you? The man with the roses, the man who thinks he can take you away from the life we've built." "You're hurting me," I whispered, though it was a lie. His grip was firm, but it was the desperation in his touch that truly stung. "I'm the one who's bleeding," he roared, his face inches from mine. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair, trailing down his jaw and onto my collarbone. "I've watched you for 3 years. I've memorized the way you drink your coffee, the way you tilt your head when you're lying, the way you look when you think no one is watching. I have been patient, I have been silent, and now you're just leaving for a ring and a bouquet of flowers?" "You never asked me to stay," I countered, the water blurring my vision. "You only ever gave me orders." "Because if I asked, I'd be begging." He slammed his palm against the pillar beside my head, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Why him, Sarah? What does he have that I can't give you? Is it the safety? The normalcy? I can burn this city to the ground and build you a
palace where the sun never sets. I can give you everything but a quiet life. Is that why you're choosing him?" He was unraveling right in front of me, the cold Mafia king melting into a man who was terrified of his own heart. He looked at my hand. "Tell me you want him and I'll disappear, but look me in the eye and say it." The rain was a deafening roar around us, creating a private world of water and steel. I looked into his eyes, dark, beautiful, and absolutely shattered. He was waiting for a death blow, prepared to lose everything because he truly believed I belonged to someone else. The revelation was right there, sitting on my tongue, ready to break the tension that had held us captive for 1,000 days. The rain continued to roar, but the space between us became a vacuum of absolute silence. Kang's grip on my hand was so tight it was as if he were trying to anchor himself to a world that was slipping away. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a raw, terrifying honesty I had never seen in 3 years of service. He was waiting for the name, the identity of the man who had supposedly stolen my heart, so he could begin the process of destroying him. I looked down at our joined hands, at the diamond that had caused a king to crumble. Then I looked back up at him, my voice barely a whisper, yet cutting through the storm. "There is no him, Kang." He froze, his breath hitching in his chest. "Don't lie to me, not now. I've seen the way you look at it. I've seen the way you protect it." "I protect it because it represents the only person in this city I truly belong to," I said, stepping closer until my damp champagne silk brushed against his soaked black trousers. "I bought this ring myself, 6 months ago, on the anniversary of my 3rd year with you.
It wasn't a gift from a lover or a promise from a fiancé. It was a reminder to myself that despite how much of my life I give to your empire, my soul still belongs to me. The silence that followed was heavy, sweet, and deafening. Kang's hands didn't drop. They slid from my shoulders to my face, his palms cupping my cheeks with a reverence that made my heart ache. The predatory fire in his eyes died down, replaced with a vulnerability so deep it looked like pain. He let out a ragged, broken laugh that was half sob, the sound lost in the rain.
"You bought it? For yourself?" he rasped, his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones. "I've spent a week losing my mind. I've paralyzed my men and threatened half the city because I thought I'd lost you before I ever had the courage to claim you." "You never had to claim me, Kang," I whispered, my own composure finally beginning to fray. "You just had to see me." He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against mine, his hot breath mingling with the cold rain. "I see nothing else. From the moment you walked into that office, it was over for me. I've spent 3 years building walls around my heart, convinced that if I let you in, you'd see the monster I am and run. I thought I could keep you near me as an advisor, as a shadow, and that would be enough. But then I saw that ring, and I realized that a world where you belong to someone else is a world I don't want to live in." He pulled me into him then, his arms wrapping around my waist with a desperate finality. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his voice trembling against my skin. "I love you, Sarah. Not as a boss loves an assistant, not as a predator loves his prize. I love you with a soul that I thought was dead until you touched it. I am a cold man, a dangerous man, but for you, I would be anything. I would be everything. Just tell me I didn't imagine the way you look at me when the lights go down." The tension that had stretched between us for 1,000 days finally snapped, replaced by a lovely, aching heat. I reached up, my fingers tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer. The Cold King was gone, replaced by a man who had finally found his home. "You didn't imagine it," I whispered into the rain. "It was always you." The rain against the windows of the penthouse was no longer a roar, but a rhythmic, soothing backdrop to the quiet that had finally settled between us. The air in the living room was warm, scented with the fading traces of sandalwood and the damp, earthy freshness of the storm we had just left behind. I sat on the edge of the plush velvet sofa, wrapped in one of Kang's oversized cashmere robes, while he knelt on the floor before me, his movements stripped of their usual predatory sharp edges. He held my hand in his, the left one where the diamond still sat, and worked a dry towel over my skin. He wasn't the Cold King anymore. He was a man who looked like he had finally found water after a lifetime in the desert. Every few seconds, his eyes would flick up to mine, searching as if he could still quite not believe that the walls we had built over 3 years had finally crumbled. "I almost ruined everything," he whispered, his voice low and raspy, devoid of the command it usually carried. He set the towel aside and leaned his forehead against my knee, his shoulders finally losing the tension of the last week. "I was ready to burn this city to find a ghost, Sarah. I was ready to let my world fall apart because I thought I was losing you."
I reached out, my fingers tracing the dark ink that spilled from under his sleeve and onto the back of his hand. "You were never losing me, Kang. You were just the only one who didn't realize how much of me you already had." He looked up then, his dark eyes shimmering with a lovely, raw vulnerability. He took my hand and pressed a lingering kiss to the center of my palm, then to each knuckle, before his gaze settled on the ring. "This ring, you said it was a reminder that you belong to yourself. I don't ever want to change that. I don't want to own you, Sarah. I just want to be the person you choose to stand beside." "A partner," I said softly, the word feeling right for the first time.
Not an assistant, not a possession, an equal. An equal, he echoed, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his lips, a sight so rare and beautiful it made my breath hitch. He reached into the pocket of his discarded suit jacket and pulled out a small, simple band of black tungsten. It wasn't a diamond, it wasn't a claim, it was a promise. He didn't put it on my finger. Instead, he placed it in the palm of my hand. I've carried this for a year. I never thought I'd have the courage to show you. It's not an engagement, and it's not a contract. It's a promise that from this night on, your shadow will never have to walk alone. If you ever want to leave, you go with my blessing. But if you stay as the woman who holds my heart and my empire in the palm of her hand. The weight of the small black band felt heavier than the diamond. It was the weight of a truth finally spoken. I looked at him, at the dangerous, beautiful man who had traded his pride for a chance at something real. I took his hand, sliding the black band onto his finger. I'm not going anywhere, I promised, my voice thick with emotion. He pulled me down from the sofa and into his arms, the two of us sinking onto the thick rug. The kiss that followed wasn't fueled by the frantic jealousy of the Gala or the desperation of the rain. It was slow, sweet, and filled with a deep, aching relief. It was the taste of 3 years of silenced longing finally finding a voice. As the city lights flickered through the rain-streaked glass, the cold boss pulled me closer, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic promise against mine. The hunt was over. We had finally found each other in the dark. The morning sun over Seoul was sharp and uncompromising, reflecting off the glass towers of the Song Syndicate headquarters like a beacon. Inside the lobby, the air was thick with the usual hushed anxiety of men who lived by the blade and the ledger. The guards stood at attention, their eyes fixed forward, waiting for the arrival of the man who ruled their world with an iron hand and a frozen heart. But today, the rhythm of the empire was about to change. The heavy glass doors slid open, and a silence more profound than usual fell over the marble hall. Kang stepped inside, looking every bit the lethal monarch in a tailored black suit, but his stride was different, slower, more deliberate, and for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't walking alone.
Beside him, Sarah Jane moved with a grace that felt like a challenge. She was no longer the invisible shadow holding a tablet and a coffee, trailing 2 steps behind her superior. She was a vision in a vibrant silk suit that mirrored the confidence in her eyes, her stride perfectly matched to his. Her left hand was bare of gloves, the diamond ring catching the light with every movement, and beside it, a simple black tungsten band on Kang's hand flashed in silent, powerful unison. As they reached the center of the lobby, the head of security stepped forward to offer the morning briefing, his gaze instinctively dropping to Sarah's position. He hesitated, waiting for her to step back, to take her place as the silent observer. Instead, Kang stopped and placed a hand firmly on the small of Sarah's back, not a gesture of possession, but one of presentation. From this moment on, Kang's voice rang out, no longer the low rasp of a desperate man, but the clear, resonant tone of a king who had found his queen. Sarah Jane does not speak for me, she speaks as me. Her word is the law of this house, and her safety is the foundation of our survival. If you bow to me, you bow to her. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the men who had spent years treating me as a piece of the office furniture. I saw the shock, the realization, and finally the reluctant, deep-seated respect. I wasn't just the woman who knew his secrets anymore. I was the woman who held his heart. I turned my head slightly, catching Kang's gaze. The coldness was gone, replaced by a lovely, protective warmth that he no longer bothered to hide.
We entered the private elevator, the doors closing on the bowing crowd below. As the lift ascended towards the penthouse, the city of Seoul began to spread out beneath us through the glass walls, a sprawling, glittering kingdom that we would now navigate together. Kang reached out, his fingers lacing through mine, his thumb grazing the diamond I had bought for myself. "Are you ready for this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice soft, intended only for my ears. "The world won't be kind to an equal. They'll look for weaknesses." "Let them look," I replied, a small, smug smile playing on my lips. I squeezed his hand, feeling the solid weight of the promise we had made in the rain. "They'll find that the only thing more dangerous than a cold mafia boss is the woman who taught him to love." The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to the top floor. We walked out into the office, the golden light of the new day flooding the room. I sat in the chair beside his, not across from him, and as we began to rebuild an empire on a foundation of partnership rather than fear, I realized that the new order wasn't just about power. It was about the freedom of belonging to someone while never losing yourself. The ice had melted, the hunt was over, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a shadow, I was the light.